El doctor Brooks Agnew ha viajado por todo el mundo en busca de evidencias arqueológicas y registros sobre la historia de la Tierra antigua, que analizó en una serie de libros de 4 volúmenes titulado El Arca de los Millones de Años. Ha descubierto que una raza de extraterrestres llamados los Ángeles Caídos en textos antiguos, incluido el libro de Enoch, estableció una raza de gigantes llamados Nephilim, que se convirtieron en una fuerza corruptora en las primeras civilizaciones humanas. Él cree que los Nephilim no fueron completamente exterminados en el gran diluvio universal y regresaron. Desde entonces han sido agentes de ángeles caídos supervivientes que manipulan a la humanidad a través de religiones, guerras y corrupción. Yo no estoy de acuerdo, pero veamos lo que tiene que decir el Dr. Agnew, que afirma que 4 de los 200 ángeles caídos originales continúan operando en la Tierra en lugares como la montaña Cheyenne, Colorado, la Antártida, el Medio Oriente y Asia. También ha investigado extensamente la literatura de la Tierra hueca, Tierra interna, y ha llegado a la conclusión de que se puede encontrar una entrada en el Polo Norte geográfico y en otros puntos del planeta. Finalmente cree que la humanidad sobrevivirá a los esfuerzos de los ángeles caídos a través de los Nephilim y las élites corruptas para manipularlos al dejar de apoyar guerras interminables y optar en su lugar por la paz mundial.
Say your research on the Nephilim, the Sumerian records, biblical records. I mean, some of that fieldwork. Did you go to some of these libraries in that region?
Oh yeah, we went to Egypt and China and Japan, Mexico. We traveled as many countries as we could, and what we found was evidence of an ancient civilization that wasn't the Egyptians. It was a long time before them, and we found lots and lots of evidence in every culture that we went to of giants and of interaction with what they called the shining ones. These they were not really called extraterrestrials, but they were called like off-worlders in their language. And they would come to their culture and teach them things like space and architecture and animal husbandry and agriculture and of course war. And we thought that the theme was very common, and also some of the aspects of them were very common. And we found that not only was there a tribe of giants called the Nephilim, but there were also Nephilim that were fallen angels. These were actual off-worlders that came here with the responsibility of watching over mankind to make sure we didn't stub our toe and go extinct, I guess. And I guess they got carried away with themselves and did what we all do. That's fall in love with Earth women. And well, the rest is a terrible history of a god getting upset with that and flooding the Earth, and that those bloodlines surviving even to this day and trying to still rule the world.
So do you want to maybe just clarify exactly who the Nephilim are in relationship to like the fallen angels? And of course you have another group like the righteous angels, and when the book of Enoch describes that. So yeah, just explain to us this cast of supernatural beings that have been manipulating, controlling humanity behind the scenes for millennia.
Well, all of the ancient writings and records that we use to write the Ark series include, of course, the Bible and as old a text and translations as we could find. And what we found is by the time you get out of, Genesis chapter 6, you're introduced to 5 races, none of whom are from here. They're all from off-world. And once you realize that, then you see the interaction between God and his creation and these other races that, I guess, get involved and genetically become involved with the race of mankind. And the result was, some call them abominations, some call them hybrids, but for sure they were genetic anomalies. And it didn't take long, just a few hundred years. They had pretty much taken over the world. And then you see God cleansing the world with the flood, and you think, okay, well, that's it. And then here you go, just a few chapters later, a few books later, the Nephilim are back. So you see that these off-worlders had the ability to leave the planet, I guess, while the flood was going on and then return, or to go inside the planet, protect themselves, and then come out at the end of that and reassert their influence. So this is something that they had in mind. They had a mission. They had a reason why they wanted to do this, not just for their own entertainment. It was kind of an ongoing war that had been described not only in the book of Revelation, but in other books in the Bible and ancient texts, where there was a war in heaven or a war in space, and that war ended up coming to Earth. And we're still fighting it.
Right. Well, I know there have been a number of authors, Paul Wallace and Mauro Bellino stand out, that they have been discussing or presenting a lot of biblical evidence showing that the Elohim were that the Yahweh, that being described as God in the Old Testament, that actually, he is part of a plurality of beings, Anunnaki, that have vied for power over humanity for millennia. So, where do you stand on that in terms of these different beings, and whether we call them Yahweh, Jehovah, Allah, these supposedly supreme beings, and these kind of like Elohim or the Nephilim, fallen angels? Where do you stand on that?
Well, I try to approach everything from a scientific viewpoint. I'm a data-driven person. I know that personal observation is a fact, but I prefer corroborated facts. I really prefer facts that I can validate with machinery or with technology. So that kind of drives me to maybe be more critical of these stories, but I do see a ton of evidence, not just in architecture, but also in the purpose of societies. Now, it's one thing to build nice buildings, but it's another thing to have pretty much a primitive culture. That is to say, you're hunter-gatherers, or you have limited reach with your society, maybe 200 or 300,000 people or 1 million people at the most, for hundreds of years, 500, 600 years. And yet here are these magnificent pieces of architecture that withstood everything Earth could throw at them. And one has to wonder why. It gave them no benefit whatsoever in their day. Were they doing it because why? What was the reason? And the only reason that I can validate over time is that they needed to build something that would last until today, so that we would ask, why were these things built? Because something about our presence on this earth, our individual presence, humans, we are really ancient beings. We are eons old. Even though we have normal lifespans of 50 to 100 years, we have lots of them. And over time, over eons of time, we gain experience and wisdom. And the more we can recall that wisdom and experience from lifetime to lifetime, the greater our society becomes, the greater our discoveries become. I don't think it was really until we started looking back and seeing pyramids and complexes and star patterns built out in city layouts that we started asking questions. Where did we come from? Why are we here? What is the purpose for being here? And what I realized that Earth, strangely enough, because we've looked for 25,000 light years in every direction in our galaxy, in pretty deep detail, there's nothing like Earth. This is the greatest show in the universe. So all these sentient races are coming here because this is the battleground right here, Earth.
Well, okay, so we can have like a number of different visiting extraterrestrials playing these roles in creating religion. Now,
you raise a very good point, because, I ask the question sometimes. You remember Columbus. Columbus came here to this continent. Who was here when he got here?
Well, I mean, we're talking about the indigenous peoples of the Americas.
Native Americans, right?
Oh.
I mean, the Cherokee, the Blackfoot, the Apache, Lakotas, they were all here, right? What were they doing? They were killing each other. They would travel hundreds of miles and wipe a whole village out down to the last child. Why? Wasn't like there was a shortage of buffalo or fish. Wasn't like there weren't enough raspberries where they lived. It's because their gods told them to. So who were their gods? It was the ETs. It was these highly advanced beings that were living among them. So you have to ask yourself the question, gosh, if you wanted to take over the world, it'd been a whole lot easier when we were shooting arrows and riding horses, right? Than now. That's not their goal. Their goal is not to take over the world. Their goal is to make the world fight itself. They live off this negative energy. They soak it in. And the more rage that they can sow on a planet, the happier they are. And we're seeing it happen around us right now.
So, when you're talking about that negative energy, some people, Bob Monroe, talked about loosh and said that this was a type of energy that's generated. So these different extraterrestrial visitors create religions and instill this kind of war ethic into certain religions. We know that is part of the way in which some of the religions operate that you've just described. So, but then you have the countervailing religions. I mean, you have, for example, Akhenaten from Egypt, you have Jesus from Palestine, you have the Buddha that teach love and compassion and empathy. So are we talking about a different group of extraterrestrials trying to kind of like bring in a countervailing set of values and behaviors?
I think actually that was the original set. The original set was to create a loving and kind of divine, almost celestial society. But it is the overwhelming energy of these other off-worlders that come and create religions. Remember, Jesus didn't create a religion, neither did Buddha. But when the religions are created, then there is the inherent conflict. One of the things that these great teachers taught is the eternality of the human soul. And one of the things that we learn in the mathematics and in the sacred geometry of these ancient higher teachings is something called the Merkaba, or the flower of life. What we realize it's tied into a principle called the Fibonacci sequence. But the Fibonacci sequence isn't just in one direction, it's in two directions. The counterclockwise energy is known in the ancients as female energy or creative energy. It's a loving energy. It creates harmony and it creates higher understanding, care, benevolence, and charity. The clockwise energy is the male energy. It's dominating, it's violent, it's destructive. And what we see in these religions that are patriarchally oriented, that is to say they're male in their energy, is they're all destructive. They all hate all other religions. There's no tolerance in them.
There's definitely that kind of like competitive warlike element in many of the religions. But you say that those Christ-like, Buddha-like figures, they come along and they establish a way of thinking. They don't establish a religion, but someone else comes along after them and appropriates it.